I guess it's good afternoon, 4:30. I'm Molly Stump, I'm the city attorney. Thank you so much for coming and being here with us this afternoon. Just really quickly, want to introduce some special honored guests. We have a number of council members with us today. We have Mayor Filsath, Councilmember Lydia Koo, and Councilmember Allison Cormack. Did I miss any elected officials? No, good. So thank you for coming and being with commissioners and learning all together with us. We also have our city manager here. Thank you, Ed. I'm sure the toughest questions will come from Ed. He's a very experienced public servant. So this is our Brown Act and Beyond training. Again, I'm Molly Stump, and my staff will be doing most of the training today. So I want to introduce you to Sandy Lee, Assistant City Attorney, Tim Shimizu, Deputy City Attorney, and our Municipal Law Fellow, Laura Holton. So they've worked hard to put this presentation together for you, and we hope that it is helpful and a little bit fun. So
Could you go back to
we can go back. So if you haven't signed on, menti.com, and those 6 numbers will let you play a little game with us right in the beginning. We'll give you all a minute to do that. If you are like me and find things technically challenging, raise your hand, and some wonderful, helpful folks from the clerk's office or my staff can come around and give you a hand with that. All right. So how we're going to handle questions this year. You can have a card. If you didn't pick one up, raise your hand and someone will come and hand out some cards to you and a pencil. And so as your question occurs to you, please write it down. If you lift your card up, someone will come around and pick it up from you, and we'll address as many of those as we have time for at the end of the presentation. All right, let's go ahead and go off this slide. Does that work for people? You'll see that number again at the appropriate time, and if you haven't quite finished your process, you can. So let me tell you what we're here to do today. We're here to learn about the Brown Act and go a little bit beyond that as well. We want to cover a little bit about the Public Records Act and want to talk more generally about meetings and about being an excellent commissioner for the city. So we'll do a little bit of historic background on the Brown Act, which is very interesting actually, I think. And then we'll go over some basics. We want to spend some time also on some challenging issues that many public meeting folks find to be a little bit difficult these days, particularly social media and serial meetings. We're going to, again, talk about tips for being an effective commissioner, participating in a really good quality public meeting. And then we will talk about the Public Records Act. So how to use this presentation. This is a primer. It is not an exhaustive treatise on this topic. Okay, so you'll be exposed to a number of ideas. Hopefully you'll learn some things. We'll try to be practical. You may still have questions. I hope you do. I hope you think about these things when you're doing your work. And so we will be making sure that you know who to call and contact to get your questions answered as you are going on and doing your work as a commissioner. This presentation focuses on what we call legislative items. That's activities that city boards and commissions are doing when you are making recommendations on policy. That's most or all of what your commissions do, unless you are on the ARB, the HRB, and sometimes the Planning Commission. Those commissions also wear a different hat, which is called quasi-judicial. Those commissions are sometimes sitting as a judge, essentially, applying the city's existing law and regulations to a specific application. And those types of activities have another set of rules in addition to these rules that also have to be complied with. We will not be going over those today. We might mention a few of them. All right, so here we go again. Here's our little thing to log into, and I wanted to start us off all thinking a little bit about public meetings. You know, state law doesn't require most of these public meetings. We don't have to do them. And yet in Palo Alto, our boards and commissions are a very important part of what we do. Why do we do this? What is it we're trying to accomplish? If we don't have to, why don't we just have staff make the decisions? Or why don't we have everything start with staff and go to the council? Why do we have commissions? Okay, so if you think about that for a minute, the various kinds of maybe goals or values or interests that are accomplished by having this system of public meetings. And if you can text in up to 3 words about your number one reason why you think we do this activity at all. What is it we're about here when we're having public meetings? And I'm going to give you a minute to think about that. All right, wow, this happened already. Great. The group has an idea, transparency, right? Democratic process, engagement, advocacy, fairness, voice, wonderful. Anti-corruption, I like that. Empathy. Trust, inform. Speed, just kidding. Okay, now that person's introducing another idea. You all focused, I think, on one of the sort of, the broad theme there is public participation. Government is the people, right? City government wants to be very connected to the citizens, and this is a key way that we do this, by bringing citizens into the decision-making process and also having citizen commissioners serve as more eyes and ears with other members of the community than our council members can engage in on any given week. Okay, let's go to the next slide. I think one of the other reasons that we have public meetings is to make better decisions, because input from more folks also, and folks who are living in this community and have a variety and diversity of experiences, increases the quality of our public meetings. So when we sit down to have a public meeting, when you convene, think about what it is you're doing, right? You're doing, I think, 2 sets of things, and I think you all agreed with me in the word cloud. We're fostering open discussion, encouraging a free flow of ideas, getting all the diverse opinions on an issue out in the open, but we're also doing the second thing, we are getting things done. We're making decisions, we're reaching conclusions, and we're moving forward. Sometimes those 2 things serve each other well, and sometimes there's a tension between them. And as a commissioner, you're called on to balance the voice, the opinions, the free flow of ideas with the need to ultimately reach a decision, speed, just kidding, right? So this isn't, I think nobody would say this is the most efficient decision-making process that could be designed. We do it this way because we very much value public input and the public being a part of government, but we still do need to reach decisions, so that's a balance. All right, let's talk a little bit about nuts and bolts, and then we're going to get into the legal requirements. So key participants in any meeting, the commissioners themselves, the chairperson, who is a commissioner, but also has some added responsibilities with respect to agenda and structuring the meeting and moving it forward. Community members who may come to your meeting, participate, speak, be a part of the decision-making process in that way. And then often staff, consultants, technical folks. Okay, these are people who may be there because they have a degree, they have resources, they've written a report. They can assist with particularly technical information as the commission is doing its work. All right, let's go on to our next slide. So the nuts and bolts of a meeting is the agenda gives you your structure for what you're going to do at that meeting. It's perfectly fine for you to continue an item that's on an agenda or to discuss it but not reach a decision. You cannot, however, discuss an item that is not on your agenda. And when my staff gets to the Brown Act, they'll explain to you why that is. So the agenda structures your meeting. Most typically, an agenda item has a number of elements. They're not all required for every item, but we typically see some kind of report, typically by staff, but it could be by a commissioner. There is public comment, that is legally required. There's a discussion, and usually there's some kind of motion and action. The public comment has to come before the action. It doesn't have to come in any particular other place in the order, okay? So you as a commission, based on the customs and practices of your commission and the decisions made by your staff liaison and your chair, can decide. You want the public comment right at the end before a final vote, that is fine. You want the public comment early on, maybe before there's a motion, that is also fine, okay? All right, I think we're gonna turn now to legal requirements, and we're gonna start with some history. Laura.
Yeah, so I'm going to go into the history of the Brown Act. In late 1951, San Francisco Chronicle reporter Mike Harris spent 6 weeks looking into the way local agencies conducted public meetings. State law had long required that business be done in public, but Harris discovered secret meetings and caucuses were prevalent. His work resulted in a 10-part series on your secret government that ran in the San Francisco Chronicle in 1952. This inspired a push for a new state open meeting law, and Assembly member and Speaker Ralph M. Brown agreed to carry it. He actually had a personal motivation for carrying this law because he was previously a lawyer who represented a group of Modesto nurses in labor negotiations with a public hospital in the early 1950s. And after Brown thought he had a deal, the hospital directors reneged in a secret meeting. So that was his personal motivation for signing on. And the legislature passed the Brown Act, and Governor Earl Warren signed it into law in 1953. Next slide. So this is the preamble of the law, and it was written by the Chronicle reporter, Mike Harris. Richard Bud Carpenter, legal counsel for the League of California Cities, actually drafted the bill, but asked Harris to write these guiding principles in terms that everyone can understand. Next. And the main principle of the act is to conduct the people's business in public with very certain exceptions.
Hi, can you hear me okay? Okay. So now that we have some context, some background and history on the Brown Act, I'm going to go over some specifics of the law and how it applies to you and your work. The Brown Act applies to legislative bodies of local agencies, and that includes elected bodies, such as the City Council, bodies that are appointed by a legislative body, and these include our city's boards and commissions. They also include standing committees of any legislative body. And standing committees are those that consist of less than a majority of the body with continuing subject matter jurisdiction or a fixed meeting schedule. So the council's two committees, the Policy and Services Committee and the Finance Committee, are both standing committees. New members who have been elected or appointed but not yet seated are already subject to the Brown Act even before they attend their first meeting. Okay, so the Brown Act applies to meetings and communications with other members of your legislative body. The Brown Act does not apply to communications between a council member or a commissioner and a member of the public. It also doesn't apply to those communications between a council member or commissioner and city staff. The Brown Act does not apply to ad hoc committees of legislative bodies, and these are committees that are comprised of less than a majority of the body that are formed on a temporary and short-term basis to address a discrete issue or set of issues with the idea that once those issues are resolved, the committee will itself dissolve. So there's no continuing jurisdiction over certain subject matters. And one example that our city has is with respect to the ARB, where there are subcommittees formed to address specific issues with respect to a development project, and it's project specific. Thanks. Okay, so the Brown Act applies to all meetings of a legislative body. So what is a meeting? A meeting is any congregation of a majority of the members of the legislative body at the same time and place to hear, discuss, or deliberate on any matter within the body's jurisdiction. So these are typically in-person meetings, but they also might occur through direct communications outside of a meeting, outside of a physical gathering of the members. They might also occur through intermediaries to discuss an item within the body's jurisdiction. So meetings can include, and often do include, the retreats or workshops of a legislative body, informal gatherings with certain exceptions set out in the law, and serial meetings. The Brown Act does establish certain gatherings of a majority that won't trigger the Brown Act procedural requirements, and those are set out in the law. They include conferences that are open to the public, community meetings held by another organization that are publicized and open to the public, the open and public meetings of other legislative bodies, whether of the city of Palo Alto or another jurisdiction, and purely social ceremonial events. So these types of gatherings, even though they involve a majority, are permissible under the Brown Act, so long as the members in attendance do not discuss city or commission business offline at those events. Okay, so serial meetings. This is possibly the trickiest area of the Brown Act. So serial meetings are those communications that involve a majority of the body that occur outside of a physical gathering of the group. So when a majority discusses any matter within the body's subject matter jurisdiction, outside of a noticed open and public meeting, a serial meeting will have occurred through that series of communications. So there are two ways that these often occur. One is called the hub and spoke, and the analogy is to a bicycle wheel where there is one member who is the central person who has communications with a number of other folks on the commission or board, and those communications ultimately involve a majority of the board or commission, and that is prohibited. The other method is through what's called the daisy chain, and this is similar to the game of telephone where one commissioner talks to another commissioner who talks to another, and so on until ultimately there's a majority that is involved in the discussion of an issue within the body's jurisdiction. So a few examples that you may want to watch out for with respect to serial meetings. One has to do with email. Now, email, you need to be very cautious in the use of email. Members of a board and commission, a majority cannot send email to each other to discuss a matter within their jurisdiction. Also, if you receive an email from another member of your body, be very cautious about forwarding that email to another member, because you may not know whether or not they've had communications with other members of the body, and whether you have now triggered a Brown Act violation because you have sent that email on to someone where you form a majority discussion. The other thing is if you get an email, let's say from a constituent or any other person where all members of your body are addressed, refrain from replying to all recipients, because a discussion can easily ensue from that action. So the other example to watch out for is when someone is acting as an intermediary. I mentioned that individual contacts between a commissioner and a member of the public or a staff person is permissible under the Brown Act. But when that person begins to act as a conduit of information among members of the body, sharing the comments of other members, that too can become a serial meeting in violation of the Brown Act. Okay, so now we have a meeting. What are the requirements? The Brown Act sets out some procedural requirements. First, legislative bodies must establish a regular time and place to meet. In most cases, meetings will occur in the city of Palo Alto within the body's jurisdiction. There are some specific examples or exceptions that will only apply to the city council from time to time. The Brown Act also requires advance notice of the meeting with a posted agenda. The agenda has to include the meeting time and place and a brief description of the items that will be discussed so that an interested member of the public can decide whether they want to attend and participate in that meeting. The agenda also has to indicate whether an item is on for action or for discussion only. And it must be posted in a place that is freely accessible to members of the public and on the city's website. The posting has to occur 72 hours in advance for regular meetings and 24 hours in advance for special meetings, which are those meetings that occur at a time or place that's different from the regularly established meetings. Okay, so if an item is not on the agenda, no action or discussion even can occur by the members of the body. The Brown Act does allow limited responses by a member, however, to public comment, brief questions to staff or the public. Members can make announcements about their activities. That also needs to be brief. Members can make a referral to staff or other information in response to public comment as well. And members can direct that items be placed on a future agenda. So the emphasis, however, in this area is that these comments must be brief and limited. Even the decision to place an item on a future agenda must be taken without discussing the underlying item and the merits of that item. Okay, so the Brown Act really requires three things: notice, an agenda, and public comment is the third piece. As Molly indicated, public comment is required, and there are at least two opportunities for public comment. One is going to be item specific on items that are on the agenda, and that public comment opportunity must occur before or during consideration of the item. And then there's also a general public comment opportunity where a member of the public can discuss anything within the subject matter jurisdiction of the body. And that general public comment period can occur at any time on the agenda, at the beginning or at the end. So the public can talk about anything during general public comment, but members cannot. They are limited to what's on the agenda. Reasonable time limits on public comment are okay, but they must be evenly applied across all speakers. And if someone needs language translation, that time is extended. Speaker cards are perfectly acceptable to ask folks to fill them out. However, members of the public do not have to identify themselves. They can remain anonymous. Okay, so now that we've gone over kind of the law as it is under the Brown Act, we thought we would take a moment to talk about one of these challenging areas, an emerging area really of serial meetings and social media. So we have a couple of hypotheticals that we wanted to talk through with you to help us, flesh out that issue.
All right, so the first hypothetical, the council consists of 7 members. The council member has a public Facebook profile on which she posts about her personal life and her life on the council. 3 other council members are her friends, and all 4 frequently comment on each other's posts, including those related to council issues. Is that a violation of the Brown Act? Raise your hand if you think it is. All right, would anybody like to explain why they think that it is?
Right, yes, so there are 4 members out of 7, so it's a majority, and they're discussing items that are council-related issues. And so it's very possible that a Brown Act violation can occur. So if there's a post on a certain issue and all 3 of the additional members are responding to that post, then you potentially have a Brown Act violation. Potentially? I say potentially only because, and what I should have mentioned at the beginning is that because this is a new development, or relatively new, not in Silicon Valley, but in the scheme of things under the Brown Act, it's relatively new, the rise of social media. There are no case decisions, no court decisions on how the Brown Act applies to social media. So our responses are going to be a little bit more hedging on what the conclusion is, because there is no clear black and white guidance on what constitutes a Brown Act violation in this arena, but we're just providing you what we think kind of the best estimate is on what that's going to be. Yes?
So suppose the original post is, be sure to come to the council meeting on Monday. We're going to discuss the new zoo. And the comments are, looking forward to talking about it. See you on Monday. Wish I would be there, going to have to be out of town. Is that, do you think, a Brown Act violation?
Well, if it's just one other person commenting in that way, then by itself, no. So here we have a majority involved in the communication and discussion about an item, and that is what would trigger a Brown Act violation.
So even though the comment is hoping for a good turnout, or come to the meeting, or looking forward to the meeting, those are the kinds of comments that would, in your opinion, be discussing council business.
So in general, logistical items like announcing a meeting will not be a violation, but be very cautious about any further response. Even looking forward to a good meeting, hope there's a good turnout, there's an element of substantive communication there that a court very well could find, depending on the full set of facts and circumstances, that is a violation. So please refrain.
So what if it wasn't something that, when they had the conversation, was an agendized item, that it hadn't already come up, and there's an extant conversation between multiple people, and then all of a sudden it gets brought up. Now it's a council issue, but it wasn't before.
The issue for the Brown Act is what is within the scope of your body. So you're on the Utilities Advisory Commission. You can participate in a discussion with UAC members about a piece of public art. That's not within the scope of your commission's work. But if it is within the scope of the UAC, even if it's not been on a recent agenda and you're not aware that it's planned for an upcoming agenda, it is the same as an item that has been on the agenda.
So on Nextdoor, which is one that would be more likely than Facebook.
That's right.
To have all of us there, we're not allowed to comment to the public about issues that are related, in my case, to utility issues, or other
Okay.
commissioners.
So hold that for a second. Are we going to talk a little bit about media, those hypotheticals of responding to the media and the public? Okay. Hold that thought for a minute. Let's move on with the discussion, and we'll come back to that one.
And just as a reminder, if you do have questions, please write them down on your card and then raise them in the air, and one of us will come around and grab your questions.
Some of our very eager students have multiple questions on their cards, and so I'm eager to pick
Yeah.
those up so we can start digesting what it is you'd like to hear more about.
Thank you so much. And on that note, what if the council members don't comment at all,
Back to the other one.
but actually just like the council-related posts? Who here thinks the like in and of itself is a Brown Act violation? Raise your hand. If you just like a comment. Okay, does anyone want to offer why they raised their hand?
That can be implied, I agree.
Exactly.
Yes, I think there is actually a court decision saying even a like on Facebook is expressive, and I think it would be reasonable to conclude that it's expressing support or approval.
And finally, what if the council members don't like or comment on any of the posts related to council at all, but are just this council member's friends on Facebook? Who here thinks that's a Brown Act violation? Okay, does anyone want to explain their answer?
Yeah, multiple people could see that, and a majority could see the intent of one of the members.
Okay.
Okay, so with respect to serial meetings, it does require some discussion or deliberation, and so this is probably less risky than the other two examples because they're just passively receiving information, if they're receiving them at all, because some people with Facebook accounts probably don't check it that often. But the real risk is when there's an engagement and discussion. So we think this is probably less risky. There's always the potential appearance of improper conduct, however, when communications occur on sites, outside of a publicly noticed meeting, but this we think should probably pass the test and not trigger a Brown Act violation.
Okay, now we're going to move on to Twitter, and we're going to be going with the example of a commission. So the commission consists of 5 members. A local resident tweets, calling on the commission to unanimously recommend approval of item number 3 on tonight's agenda. This is retweeted by Commissioner 1 without comment. Commissioner 2 retweets Commissioner 1's tweet with the comment, "Amen." Commissioner 3 comments on Commissioner 2's tweet stating, "Keep dreaming." Is this a violation of the Brown Act? Raise your hand. Would anybody like to explain why they think this is a violation? Yes. Exactly. It's a majority, and it's a discussion of a substantive item on the agenda.
Yeah, right, and I would just add that even though there isn't concurrence or agreement necessarily among all of these folks who are discussing, it's really the discussion and deliberation that's important in whether or not there's a Brown Act violation.
I think amen is an agreement.
Sorry?
As soon as they said amen, that's your agreement.
Oh, well, no, but the last comment was keep dreaming, which I actually took to mean I don't agree, but maybe you thought it meant something else. And so, just to kind of close the loop on this, because this is, uncharted territory, we want to be a bit cautious in how we deal with social media. Your presence on social media, especially for our elected officials, is probably expected by many of your constituents. And so we wouldn't say don't be present on social media. And your original posts are fine. We think they should probably be fine under the Brown Act. But it's when you start commenting on other members' posts, and then there is this possibility that there will be a discussion that ensues. And so we would caution you against commenting on other members' posts and tweets and all that, but you yourself can originate a comment on your own sites.
What if it's a share or retweet but with no comment at all, like I'll retweet
Okay, well, so there's no specific law on this, but I think it's probably reasonable to presume that a retweet also expresses some support and approval, much sort of like a like on Facebook. So that's the type of thing that we think you should avoid.
But if presumably somebody who's on a commission for the arts or something has some larger interest in that, so they may, in the context of their life or their profession, be tweeting and commenting or whatever, that's not necessarily about commission business, but that may be something that also comes up across the commission. Are you suggesting that anybody who has a professional specialty in the area of their commission is not allowed to engage in social media as part of their business?
So and we may continue this dialogue with you because you have a particular interest in it after. We'll stay for about a half an hour before the council meeting starts. But to turn back to answering the question, Sandy.
No, these examples have to do with the communications of other members of your body. So you can certainly retweet other members of the public, their tweets. You can do that. You could, other professional colleagues who are not on your legislative body, there's no restriction on that. We're talking about members of your own legislative body. Okay.
That's the area where you want to be cautious, is responding and having a discussion and an interaction between yourself and other members of your legislative body. That can end up being a serial meeting. We certainly, and this is the reason this is a touchy area, is that social media is an incredibly powerful tool to engage the public. And that's what we're doing here. That's what we want in government, is community engagement. So we don't want to discourage your discussions with your neighbors, friends, and fellow Palo Altans. That should occur. It's if you find that a discussion is developing with other members of your legislative body, that needs to be brought into a noticed meeting and had in this formal way. Yes, we'll move on. This is an area that we will not fully solve today. I see a few of you with a wrinkled brow. You're not alone, and we'll continue to discuss it, and we are available to answer your questions as you go forward and do your work. Tim.
Good afternoon. My name is Tim, and I'm going to take you into closed sessions. Now, for most of you, closed sessions actually don't apply. They only apply to our city council. So really only like 3 of you here, this applies. So I'm going to take it with you really quickly. So the Brown Act, the default rule, as we've heard all afternoon, is in favor of transparency. You have to have meetings, you have to deliberate in public, you have to deliberate with agendas. The public has to know that you're going to deliberate, not just to vote, but also deliberate, and that's why we've been talking about all of these rules. The one exception to that is the Brown Act does allow closed sessions for the city council to make specific decisions. And this usually has to do with negotiations. So things like real property negotiations, negotiating salary, evaluating top-level employees, litigation, and other very specific categories specified by the Brown Act. So the council doesn't, and the cities don't get to make up any reason they want to just because they feel like they want to talk about it in private. So the most important thing about closed session for everyone to know is that closed session discussions and results and any kind of documents that are passed out are generally confidential to the public. And the council has to decide as a group if they want to make any kind of deliberation or information public to the rest of the world. It is not one person's decision. They have to decide as a group that they are going to release certain information. And closed session are noticed. You'll find it on council agendas all the time. And they have to say exactly which item or what type of closed session they're going to have. And they could have multiple ones in one meeting, but they have to say, we're having a closed session about real property negotiation or closed session about pending litigation. And so closed session will also usually involve some essential staff and any kind of agent or representative that the city is engaging for that. So if the city hired an outside lawyer, that person can come and talk about what's happening. Okay, next slide. Lastly, I'm here to talk to you about enforcement of the Brown Act as a whole. So what happens if, for some reason, you inadvertently have a serial meeting or something goes wrong, you forgot to put something on the agenda and you somehow come to a decision about it? What do you do? What are the enforcement mechanisms? So the most important thing for everybody here to remember is that you can go back and fix it. You can put something on the next agenda or a future agenda, rediscuss, revote. That is the number one thing that you should keep in mind. If you feel like something went wrong or for some reason there was a potential violation, you talk to your staff, they'll engage our office. If we need to, we get a redo. Commissions, you get a redo. Just always remember that. There are very specific ways that you can run afoul of the law in more serious ways. We won't go into specificity, but it does go up to criminal penalties if you are intentionally trying to deprive the public of the main parts of the Brown Act. So if you can be found liable for a misdemeanor, if you are found to have intended to deprive the public of information to which it is entitled under the Brown Act. So no one ever does that, I don't think, but please remember, it is very, very important to follow the Brown Act. And remember, you always have a chance to go fix it if something goes wrong. Okay, so Molly is gonna now take us back to the big picture of the Brown Act.
So let's remember why we're here. We just put this slide up again to remember our goals of public participation, open decision-making, but also reaching a decision and moving forward. Next slide. So how can you be an excellent commissioner? A couple things, very basic actually. Please read the agenda and supporting materials. Ask staff questions in advance if you have technical questions about the materials. That is not a Brown Act violation. As Sandy said, it's fine for you as an individual commissioner to speak to a staff person. Talk with community members, okay, except for quasi-judicial. This is a special asterisk there. There are special rules where members of the ARB in particular need to be cautious about that. A big part of what you're doing here as a commissioner is you have your finger on the pulse of the community. You can find out, what do your neighbors think and know and feel about the issue that you're going to be discussing. Invite them to the meeting. Okay, be that conduit between city government and Palo Altans. At the meeting, please participate. Be polite and respectful at all times. Honor the special role of the chair. If you haven't chaired a meeting, it's not an easy job. You're doing juggling a lot of things. You're trying to bring out the full conversation and all the ideas. You're also trying to keep the agenda moving so that you can do your business and at some point conclude your meeting. Try to stay on topic, be positive and concise, and get familiar with meeting procedures. So, next slide, and show and tell, Tim. We have passed out, and if you didn't get it, you can get it afterwards, Rosenberg's Rules of Order. Okay, you've all heard of Robert's Rules of Order. How many people have actually read all of Robert's Rules of Order? Raise your hand.
Very large section.
Wow, wow. Okay, and did you find them very useful? Maybe not. Convoluted, yes, I mean, if they're ancient in their origin, they're very complex. And the League of Cities and Judge Rosenberg realized a few years ago that they really are not that helpful to a modern multi-member body. And so he has distilled these rules down to their essence in an easily readable format. Now, having said that, it still is not super intuitive. A motion, an amendment, friendly amendment. What is a friendly amendment? Some people don't think they exist. Right, so read the rules, pay attention at the meeting. Most of our commission meetings are relatively informal. Your staff liaison and your chair can assist you but it is good to try to familiarize yourself with the basic rules of parliamentary procedure. Now, your commission probably also has local rules and procedures. You might want to get a copy of those and read those. Each of our commissions is different in its culture, in its history, the type of issues you're addressing, the way you're addressing them, and that is fine. Okay, as long as you are doing the public's work in a way that meets the legal minimum and that you're aligned with what council has asked you to do, the work that council has asked you to address for the community. It is fine to have some localized differences, but it is good to read your procedures. All right, your commission staff support person can assist you with questions on procedures. Occasionally, questions from commissions get forwarded by your staff liaison person to my office. And if it's very complicated, then we can get involved as well. You also will want to know who your assigned council liaison is. Oftentimes that person might attend your meetings. Sometimes that person may not attend your meetings. That's fine. But you will want to stay, in some sense, in connection with our city council. Very distinct, these same Brown Act rules apply to them, but they have a very distinct characteristic, of course. Each of them has been elected by the citizens of Palo Alto to represent this community. And you all are appointed. So they are most closely in touch with our community and responsible to our community. So you want to stay aligned with our city council. All right. We're going to switch gears for a minute, then a bunch of you had questions. We'll spend a few minutes on questions before we break today. Thanks. Tim.
So now we're going to move on from the Brown Act, which regulates how meetings must occur, to the California Public Records Act, which governs how the government's, the city's documents, and in a very broad definition, documents are governed and how the public has access to them. So now the California Public Records Act gives a very, very broad definition, as you can see at the top. So any writing, so already we're very broad, any writing containing information relating to the conduct of the public's business, which is prepared, owned, used, or retained by any state or local agency, which includes the city and all of its commissions and boards, regardless of physical form or characteristics. So how many of you have been on a commission before? Raise your hand. Okay, what kind of paper do you guys touch? What kind of city-owned work product do you look at as a commissioner? Staff reports, what else? Applicants' drawings, what else? Older minutes of other past meetings. What about, yes? Proposals, so if you're on like a commission that makes decisions, yes, what else? Draft minutes, because you have to approve them, of course. Yes? Constituent email is a big one. And how do you usually get those emails? Paper, so they're put into a packet for you. Do any of the commissioners get emailed directly from the public? Okay, yes. What other kinds of work product do you see? Anything else? Yes. Okay, so yes, so slides and other presentations. So these are all examples of public records that fall within the California Public Records Act. And so we have a kind of general description up here of what kind of documents are within the Public Records Act. And some things are very intuitive, things like you said, staff reports, things that are presented to you in public, things that are posted on the internet. It can also include things like contracts that the city has with its vendors, permits that city gives out to a certain point. It also includes things like emails, and even emails between staff and elected officials and commissioners like you.
What about drafts of colleagues' memos that are being worked on?
Okay, so an interesting question, a draft of something, of a memo that's still being worked on. So there are some exceptions to the PRA. Things that, if the default rule is that all documents that fall under this definition are disclosable to the public, there are some exceptions, like the draft exception, that may apply and make the document not disclosable to the public. And those are situations that we'll talk about in the next slide. And so the main thing that for you to remember is that documents can live anywhere. They may live on city servers, they may live in your personal Gmail accounts, they may live on Twitter, they may live on Facebook. They also may be put in Dropbox if that's where you're putting files. And the main thing to remember too is that the PRA only applies to records that already exist. So in the next slide, it'll become clear about why that's important. So we'll go to the next slide. And this slide talks about Public Records Act requests. So under the California PRA, Public Records Act, the city has a duty to disclose documents that are not otherwise privileged under the PRA. So, and there are statutory timeline where we have to do that. It's 10 days, 14 days, so on, so on. So very, very quickly. So the most important thing for you as commissioners to remember is to identify when have I received a PRA request, so that you can then quickly and immediately forward it on to the clerk's office or to your staff liaison, so that city staff can process it. It's not your job to process PRA requests. So a PRA request, it can be in an email, it can be oral even, that's very rare actually. Most people submit PRA requests through the city's PRA portal. If you Google Palo Alto public record, it will be the first hit. And most people submit records that way. That's the easiest and most direct way to submit a PRA request. But if a constituent emails you and says, oh, you had this presentation last week, or you had this staff report, there was a document that was passed out in the meeting, but I didn't see it or I didn't get it, can I have it? That is a Public Records Act request, and you need to forward that on to staff so that they can fulfill it for you. And so you mentioned there is an issue about, well, I have these drafts, what do I do with that? Or I have a document from a city attorney giving me legal advice. I don't know if I should give that out. So that, first of all, that's the reason why staff processes PRA requests, so that we can figure that out for you and make those determinations consistently across the board. Another thing is that many documents already live online. So if you can always point people to very frequently requested documents such as agendas. If you're on a commission or on the council, you should look for the website for your commission, and all of the agendas and the minutes will be posted there on a regular basis. The last thing to remember about PRA requests that I would like to impart today is that PRA requests in the city of Palo Alto have jumped substantially. So in fiscal year 13, there were about 132. This past fiscal year, there were over 370. And these all have to get fulfilled within the statutory timeline of 10 days, 14 days, so on and so forth. And that means documents get reviewed. And that can include attorney review, staff review, email searches, lots and lots of work. And that we have a very streamlined workflow that the clerk's office and the attorney's office works on to make sure that we do not miss those timelines. And so the most important thing, again, is if you get a PRA request or if you suspect that you received one, pass it along to the clerk's office or your staff liaison, and we will take care of it. One fine point, though, is that the PRA system is not a general form to ask questions. So there's a distinction between, I'd like the staff report that talked about X. People don't have to name it precise or anything like that, but if you can figure it out what it is, we'll give it to you, right? But it's not a form for questions like, how many parking spaces does the city have in its total inventory? So maybe there's a document that has that, but maybe not. And so we'll do our best to find that document if it exists, but it's not necessarily a call for the city then to go out, send someone out and count, and then make a report about that. So remember, PRA requests are not a general form to just ask questions. That's really, there are other better forms to do that. So remember, the answer will always be giving someone a document or lots of documents, as is the case several times, not just answers to questions.
Great. We have raced through a ton of material. Can people hear me? So Sandy and I are going to share with you a few questions that we got from the audience. We got a fantastic set of questions. We cannot address them all. If your question didn't get addressed, We'll hang around for another 15 or 20 minutes while council is getting settled for their meeting, and we'll chat with you. Okay, so someone asks, is it a Brown Act violation for a city staff member to solicit council or commissioner opinions on a matter before writing their staff report? How many people think that is a Brown Act violation? Nice. It is not a Brown Act violation. Okay, now it might be a bad idea. That is different. And I can tell you that city staff, I think in general, tries to treat all members of a legislative body in an open and fair way. I can tell you, as an official who reports directly to a city council, nothing would place my job in peril quicker than soliciting information from some council members and not from others. So we do, when we do involve ourselves in that way in the formation of an item, and sometimes it is appropriate to do so, we try to do it in a balanced way. Sandy.
Okay. Can there be more than one public comment session during a meeting? And this is a two-part question. That's the first part. And the answer is yes, there will probably be more than two. So as our council and many of our commissions operate, there's a public comment period with each item, and then there's also a general public comment period. And then can you have a 3-minute limit for general public comment and a 2-minute limit for a large group speaking to a topic? And that's a limit per speaker. The answer to that is yes. So this is really a meeting management issue that the chair can decide that there are so many speakers and we need to actually get through this item of business that the normal amount of time, 3 minutes, may be reduced to 2 minutes.
Great. This is really a thinker question. The audience member asks, is there any form of electronic and public communication that a commission can use to debate issues? For example, what if the city hosted a website equally accessible to the public and the commission where information and views could be exchanged? No motions, no decisions or votes, just a public and online debate. First of all, how many people think that might be a really nice idea? Yes. Is it legal? No. So this is a form, an area that sometimes people find extremely frustrating. So it bears some thought about why that's illegal. Okay? So if the forum is open to everyone, and there's no fee to join or no application, then you might think, well, it's open to the public. However, it's not open to a member of the public who doesn't have or know how to use the piece of electronics that's required. And even if there was ubiquitous electronics and we were very confident that everybody could be included, it lacks one of the essential features of a noticed public meeting. And what is that? The agenda posted in advance. If you were doing this kind of thing, a member of the public who was interested in the topic might stumble across your discussion and participate in it. But what their right is under state law is to know that your body meets at a particular place and time when your agenda will be posted, and they have a right to know in advance that you intend to discuss that item and be present in real time as it is discussed. So maybe someday in the future the state legislature will find a way to foster this kind of online debate. Right now it can happen, staff can host it, and the community can participate in. And our website does include some opportunities for this type of interaction, but a multi-member body cannot do so under the law. Sandy has one final question, and we'll wrap up.
Okay, so please discuss the posting of when a member is away from the location of the meeting and will call into the meeting. So this question is referring to the possibility to teleconference into the meeting. A quorum of the body has to be present within the jurisdiction. so within the city of Palo Alto, for the meeting to occur. However, occasionally there is one member who may be traveling, who might call into the meeting. And basically, that location where that member is calling in from is treated like the place where the meeting is being held. So that location needs to be noticed on the agenda that's posted here on our website. It also needs to be posted at the site where that member is, whether they're in Mountain View or whether they're in Shanghai. It needs to be posted at that location. And also, folks have to have the opportunity, if a member of the public wants to enter that location and participate in the meeting, they must be able to have that opportunity, and they must be able to, they must be given the opportunity to provide public comment at that location.
Great. So we are out of time. We will not hold you hostage to these fascinating issues of public process, but we will hang around. Please, please, please fill out an evaluation for us. This is how we understand what we did well and how we can evolve this training to be more effective for you in the future. If you don't have Rosenberg's Rules of Order, pick up a copy, and we'll hang around and chat with you about your questions. Thanks. Yes, the slides we are going to post the slides, and we hope that we will actually post a video today. We'll see if we can edit it to make sense.